Tonight on NewsWatch, deep freeze in the deep south. How a once-in-a-lifetime storm is bringing snow and ice from Texas to Virginia. Plus, the State of the Union, as the president prepares to make his big speech, a look at what Americans can expect. And how the push to pass gay marriage could be imposing on your religious rights. All this and more tonight on NewsWatch. Good evening. I'm Mark Martin. Some of the warmest places in America are facing ice and snow tonight. Meanwhile, up north, folks are dealing with one of the most brutal winters on record. Lori Johnson has more in tonight's top story.
Old Man Winter is giving the South a beating that they are not equipped to handle. Some places are running out of shovels, plows, and salt. Road crews from Georgia to North Carolina are preparing for snow and ice and advising folks to go home and stay there.
You're putting other people in danger if you don't have to be out, if you're out riding around in these roadway conditions.
In Florida, they're smothering streets with sand while residents stock up on supplies. Winter weather warnings stretch from Texas to the Carolinas to Virginia.
You prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
Even up north, where people are used to icy, snowy winters, it is unusually bad this year. Blowing snow is causing dangerous whiteout conditions.
Lots of spinouts. The roads are real icy due to the temperatures.
Near Cleveland, this rare sight, snow rollers formed by high winds that look like Arctic tumbleweeds.
This is just something else.
The conditions have already grounded thousands of flights, leaving many travelers stuck at airports. The dangerous cold has schools closed again today in Chicago, Minneapolis, and St. Paul. Some parents are growing frustrated.
Really don't understand why CBS is closed.
It just throws everyone into chaos.
On the Delaware River, Coast Guard icebreakers are trying to knock out ice jams. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Americans are pessimistic about the future of the country. In a new NBC Wall Street Journal poll, more than 60% say the country is heading in the wrong direction. 68% think the country is either stagnant or worse off since President Obama took office. And 81% say they disapprove of Congress. When describing the work taking place in Washington, the most used words in the survey were divided, troubled, and deteriorating. In the face of those depressing numbers, President Obama delivers his sixth State of the Union address tonight. The theme, his belief the government should do more to create economic opportunity for those struggling in the sluggish economy. And he's sending a strong signal that if lawmakers won't go along with his plans, he'll go around Congress to get what he wants, starting with an announcement that he's signing an executive order to raise the minimum wage for federal contract workers to $10.10 an hour. White House correspondent Jennifer Wishon tells us that could cause an issue with Congress.
I think at this point in his presidency, kind of nearing the middle of his second term, he's worried about legacy, and the president really wants to be able to leave office and say that he improved the economy and say that he, was able to move the ball on immigration reform and other things. And so I think at this point, maybe he's not going to be so worried about that ill will on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue.
You'll find full coverage of tonight's State of the Union at cbnnews.com. And tomorrow we'll bring you a special edition of NewsWatch with coverage from the nation's capital. In other news, Monday marked International Holocaust Remembrance Day. From Poland to the UN to Israel, ceremonies commemorated the deaths of 6 million Jews in what some call history's greatest crime. Chris Mitchell has that story from Jerusalem.
The
world remembered the Holocaust, but for survivors, the memories never fade.
There's not one day when we don't think about the events hidden in our minds. There's not one day. It always returns. Dreams return. We still hear in our dreams dogs barking, those German commands.
In Auschwitz, more than 50 Knesset members joined Holocaust survivors and world leaders to mark the liberation of the worst of the Nazi death camps. They shared memories of the place where Nazis murdered more than 1 million Jews, where life expectancy of those arriving was sometimes measured in minutes.
Dogs were barking, and there was a terrible smell.
We didn't know what the smell was. We could only see the chimneys with flames a couple of meters high. We didn't know that it was the crematorium.
At the UN, filmmaker Steven Spielberg shared the hope of Holocaust survivors.
Survivors and witnesses often say that their dearest hope, the hope that helped keep them alive, was to be heard and to be believed and to be understood.
Spielberg made Schindler's List. The movie told the story of Oskar Schindler, who saved thousands of Jews during the Holocaust, like Rena Finder.
Oskar Schindler has proven, like a shining star, that there is always something somebody can do.
On International Holocaust Remembrance Day, over and over around the world, whether at Auschwitz, the UN, or here in Jerusalem at Yad Vashem, Israel's National Holocaust Museum, the refrain was the same: never again.
When we say that phrase, never again, it shouldn't just be something that we say without thinking. It should mean that we are taking an active stance, that we don't want something like that to happen ever again.
It's important to come here and to give testimony that we were prisoners. It should be a lesson. Such events shouldn't happen again.
Theirs were journeys into the Holocaust. They cannot emerge from it, and neither can the world until there are no more genocides, until the unthinkable becomes impossible.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
A new call for the release of an American imprisoned in North Korea. The U.S. Special Representative for North Korea policy is urging the government there to let Korean-American missionary Kenneth Bae go, saying his health is bad and he needs to come home. Bae is a Christian and a former tour guide operator in North Korea. He's serving 15 years of hard labor for what North Korea calls crimes against its state. Supporters of Pastor Saeed Abedini say an Iranian official recently offered a glimmer of hope the imprisoned American could be set free. The American Center for Law and Justice reports Iran's foreign minister suggested clemency could be an option. In an interview with CNN, the foreign minister replied to a direct question about Pastor Abedini by saying, "We have various clemency measures in Iran that can be introduced. Happened in the past, can be introduced again in these cases." He quickly followed up by saying the decision is not up to him, but to Iran's judiciary. You can find out more about the efforts to free Pastor Abedini by going to cbnnews.com. An Iranian foreign ministry spokesman says his country's path to nuclear development is irreversible. The comment came in advance of Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan's visit to Tehran to discuss cooperation between the two countries. Meanwhile, a former Bush administration national security official says the Iran nuclear agreement allows the country to proceed with nuclear weapons development. Elliot Abrams made his comments during a recent interview with Gary Lane.
You know, first of all, there's three legs for a nuclear weapon. There's the enrichment, the centrifuges and all of that. There's missiles and there's a warhead. This agreement says nothing about stopping them from developing a warhead, and it says nothing about stopping them from developing their missiles. It just focuses on enrichment. And everybody says, no, it's a real good agreement, you see, because they're going to turn their 20% enriched uranium into other forms. They're going to convert it into oxide or other forms that are not useful for weaponry. If you look a little further, you see that they've promised to convert it as soon as they have the capability to do that. A kind of a factory or plant that can do that conversion. They don't have it now. Now, are they going to set it up in February? They're going to set it up in March? They're going to set it up in April? Who knows? At the end of 6 months, it may be that they've found unfortunate delays, and that means that they will not have converted any or much of that 20% uranium. They may be that much closer to a weapon. Now, the IAEA has talked about the military uses, the military program the Iranians have, this warhead program, and asked for information. Under this agreement, we don't talk about their access to military sites and about the warhead. I just, it seems to me that the Iranians don't pay much for this agreement, and they're going to get a huge benefit. The sanctions are being eroded. In previous years, we always had the sense, more sanctions, ratcheting up, tougher sanctions. We've turned a corner here, and the sanctions for the first time are starting to be lifted. And you see in the newspapers every day, businessmen from all over India, France, Germany, Italy are rushing to Tehran to do new deals because they think this will never be turned around. We climbed up the hill, now we're starting to climb down.
It seems like a reversal of 30 years of U.S. foreign policy on Iran, is it?
It is. And you know, that would be fine if we had a good, tough nuclear agreement, which is what we all want. They really stopped their nuclear program, we stopped the sanctions. I don't think they've stopped their nuclear program. They've never done anything that would so alarm the West, the Americans, the Israelis, that there'd be any kind of military attack. Slow and steady wins the race has been the way they've been approaching this. I think they may slow down now a little bit, but they're still moving forward toward nuclear weapons capability.
So do you think this president doesn't care about Iran developing a nuclear weapon?
I think he sees a problem with a nuclear Iran between now and the end of his term. I mean, he's made so many speeches about how they can't do that, we won't let them do that, that I think would create a huge problem for him if one day, say, they test a nuclear device. I think he wants to kick the can down the road 3 more years until he's not president.
Well, he had a red line on Syria, and he didn't do anything about that.
I think the red line on Iran is tougher. You know, the red line on Syria, he said it once off the cuff in a Q&A interview. I think he probably regretted saying it. This is different. He's on the record here 25 times, including during his visit to Israel. I will not permit. In the beginning, he said they will not be permitted. Passive voice. Then he got active voice. I will not permit. So I think he can't actually permit it. So if the Iranians are headed that way and you can't permit it, what do? Try to slow it down. Try to keep them from doing it over the next 3 years. Probably take him a year or 2 anyway. And I think he would also like to stop the Israelis from doing anything. Now, I would ask the question, of course, what happens if the Iranians are about to do it? Would he change his view of an Israeli strike? And I think the answer may be yes, under those circumstances.
1 year, 2, analysts disagree on just how close Iran may be to actually possessing a nuclear bomb. Abrams says regardless, the Islamic Republic is closer than ever to developing a nuclear weapon. And you can hear more from Abrams at Gary Lane's blog, The Global Lane, at cbnnews.com. Coming up, the fight to prevent human trafficking at this year's Super Bowl. President Obama has declared January National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. He's calling on businesses, communities, faith-based groups, and all Americans to join the fight. The federal government is developing its first ever strategic action plan to strengthen victim services and increase protections against human trafficking in federal contracts. The state of New Jersey is ready to welcome thousands of football fans for the Super Bowl this weekend, but authorities are also gearing up for a darker side of the big event, an influx of human traffickers. A congressional committee held a hearing this week on human trafficking at major sporting events and what is being done to fight the problem. Officials also heard the testimony of a sex trafficking survivor.
Within hours of running away, I was forced into prostitution on the streets and in the casino hotels and motels of Atlantic City, New Jersey. 36 hours later, I was arrested by police and treated like a criminal.
The only standard that fits the crime of human trafficking is zero tolerance, and it must be vigorously and faithfully enforced by arrests of those engaged in this nefarious trade, modern-day slavery.
The average age of entry into forced prostitution for child victims in the U.S. is 13 to 14 years old. Congressman Smith emphasized the government must respond more aggressively to end sex trafficking. Up next, why some say gay marriage is one of the biggest threats to religious liberty in American history. Welcome back. New measures in South Dakota aim to protect pastors and businesses who refuse to take part in gay weddings. The 2 bills have just been introduced in the state legislature. They would prevent lawsuits in cases where clergymen or business owners cite religious beliefs for not participating in same-sex marriages or receptions. The measure's main sponsor is State Senator Ernie Otten. He says bakers should not be sued for not making a cake for a gay couple. The South Dakota Constitution and state law currently ban gay marriage. Christians who stand up for traditional marriage may be finding themselves in court in the years ahead as part of the legal battle over gay rights versus their religious freedom. Christians could face charges of hate speech and more. Paul Strand explains in tonight's Focus Report.
When it announced its pro-gay marriage rulings, the Supreme Court also attacked the motives of those who came up with the Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA. It enshrined traditional marriage in federal law. But writing for the majority, Justice Anthony Kennedy said the avowed purpose and practical effect of the law here in question are to impose a disadvantage, a separate status, and so a stigma upon all who enter into same-sex marriages. And he wrote, DOMA writes inequality into the entire United States Code.
The court said that the Federal Defense of Marriage Act is literally irrational.
The law was motivated by animus. Animus means hatred and discrimination.
That it was just the fruit of bigotry and benighted souls.
There's absolutely a growing threat under this administration and under this court.
Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council says the hostility against supporters of traditional marriage will get worse.
And I think you will see open hostility, increasing open hostility. I mean, we've seen just over the weekend at gay pride events where there were Christians there were beaten because they took a stand for biblical morality.
Thomas Peters at the National Organization for Marriage says up till now, action against traditional marriage backers has mostly come at the state level, and cases have been piling up in recent years.
The Colorado baker who right now could spend a year in jail for refusing to give a wedding cake to a gay ceremony, or the town clerks in New York that had to resign their jobs because they simply asked that someone else in the office would sign the same-sex marriage licenses and they wouldn't have to do it. Or the wedding photographer in New Mexico who's been fined thousands of dollars simply for saying that they didn't want to photograph a gay ceremony.
In Canada, which has had same-sex marriages nationwide since 2005, in the last few years, 200 to 300 cases against opponents of gay marriage were brought before courts, human rights commissions, and employment boards. Now Perkins expects a steep rise in cases across the U.S., and he says that's going to have a major impact on America.
This is about fundamentally altering the American society. Loss of religious freedom, loss of parental rights, employers, bakers, photographers, florists being forced to participate by threat of law in same-sex marriages.
This Washington State florist in March refused to supply the flowers for a gay wedding because of her Christian beliefs.
She said, I will happily serve you as an individual, but I don't believe in gay weddings, and so I'm not going to do the weddings for your ceremony. The Attorney General and the ACLU colluded to sue her with criminal and civil penalties. This is just a gross overreach of power.
And these days, the most active of gay rights activists demand affirmation from everyone, and they suggest it's anti-gay to do anything less than show full support for them.
At this moment, apathy and passivity are no better than bigotry.
For instance, an email went to Department of Justice managers this spring saying they should display a gay pride symbol in their office. And it instructed when it comes to gays, quote, don't judge or remain silent. Silence will be interpreted as disapproval. So one big worry in this atmosphere is what happens to federal workers who believe homosexuality is unbiblical. Some military members have already run into trouble. Retired chaplain Ron Cruz tells of two Christians having Bible study in their post-exchange, reading Romans 1, a chapter that blasts homosexual behavior.
2 tables over, a soldier heard them, came up to them and started cursing at them for talking about him, and then called an MP over, wanted to reprimand them for talking about him, when all they were doing was reading scripture.
Cruz talked to an Air Force officer who'd had a Bible on his desk for 23 years, but not now.
His superior officer told him, you cannot put your Bible on the desk because it may offend someone.
Former Delta Force Commander Jerry Boykin warned the military depends on patriotic people of faith to fill its ranks.
When young men and women across America are told that they must leave their faith at the door, then they're not going to come in our military, and our military readiness will decline as a result of it.
Even your civilian pastor could face trouble in the future if he serves as a civil minister marrying couples, and he won't do gay weddings.
The same way that tax status could be threatened, ministerial exemptions could be threatened as well, if we continue to embed this false idea in the law that standing for marriage equates with bigotry.
This may be the biggest threat to religious liberty in all of America's history, when the rights of the country's largest group, its religious believers, are threatened so that a small sexual minority can have its lifestyle affirmed by all members of society, whether they want to affirm it or not. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from Capitol Hill.
Up next, Super Bowl fever. See what some fans are turning to predict the winner. Finally tonight, while most people turn to sports analysts for their Super Bowl predictions, in Sarasota, Florida, some people are turning to Buffett the manatee. For the last 6 years, the Moat Marine Aquarium has had its manatees predict the Super Bowl champion. The manatees are born in captivity and are trained to participate in behavioral experiments. At the sound of a whistle, they swim across a pool and seek out a target. Aquarium staffers then lower color pictures of both teams and let the mammals make their pick.
I would go with Buffett. Buffett is 6 for 6 on his Super Bowl picks, and Hugh is 4 for 6. So they both have really good records.
All right, Buffett's predicting the Broncos will win the title this year. However, Buffett's half-brother Hugh is giving his vote to the Seahawks. The Super Bowl is set for this coming Sunday night. Well, if you bank on Buffett, then you want to pick the Broncos. That's all for this edition of NewsWatch. Remember, you can email us your comments and questions at newswatch@cbn.com. Hope you'll join us next time.